How's my cosmic weather, or how's my...
I love that answer. Yeah, how's your cosmic weather?
The earth is in my vocation. So I do feel like, and the energy, I do feel the energies right now. And I did have the possibility to take a little bit of a walk outside, right when the sun was going down, and that felt really grounding. I didn't have a lot of energy though. I didn't walk fast. I just walked, and then I was like, oh, it's still like a kilometer to get home, and it felt like far. So I don't know.
uh, I finally in Colorado, it very rarely rains here. We will often get snow during um, during the winter time, but rain is a rarity. And today it rained, which was lovely because I love the smell of the air after it rains. And I thought, well, this is kind of um, it got very dark and cloudy, and I wondered if we might be graced with a little bit of thunder, but you know, that didn't really come up. It was sort of a gentle rain with that. It was very cool, but um, at any rate, that kind of introduces this week's lunar alchemy transit, which I decided to speak about rather than titling it as a shadow, but as a shock. And it's the shock of thunder, where we have in the I Ching 2 trigrams, each one representing thunder. So it's thunder over thunder. So that's kind of where we are in terms of the solar energies and what I'm excited to talk about with you today. So, Bella, what does this aspect of thunder mean to you and for you? How do you see this energy? And I don't know, what do you feel moved to share about it?
Yeah, I do feel like sometimes we speak about the human predicament, and I feel like many times we've done that, but this feels like an important part of that human predicament, the unease and the agitation that is there inherently when a spirit comes into physical form, and when the soul chooses a certain life path. So that's what's there. And right now we have the sun that is joined by a few other planets in Aries, and we are in the beginning of a astrological year. We're coming up towards a new moon that is the first new moon in Aries in the astrological year. So it feels like a lot of energy and that fire thunder element. And then on the opposite side, where the earth is right now, on the opposite side of the wheel, we have the 57. That is, that can the body hold that unease? Can we hold all that? And I also feel a lot that the 51 has that initiating energy that in the body graph is connected to the 25, which is the innocence. So there is this aspect of, it doesn't matter how many times we get shocked, we can still, there is still an innocence. And I see that you're making me whole, so I'm actually going to share I'm going to show us all. So we have these planets in Aries, so the Sun, Venus, Mercury, and Chiron. And then on the other side in Libra, we have the 57, we have the Earth. This is powerful. And it's almost like that 57 has to hold everything in the body and hear everything that's going on, all the things that are going on. And then what I was saying next is the 25 is that universal love, or the innocence. And instead of every time that the thunder or the lightning shocks, we could constrict more and more and more, because it's strange. But the 25 shows us that that shock is an initiation, and it's actually instead of being shocked and closing and constricting more, it is that spiritual kind of awakening that happens from, not turning the other cheek, but it's much more mystical. It's that thing that you would really think that with all logical ways of seeing it, that it's going to constrict, but actually it's an initiation. That shock is felt into this G center that is about your identity, who you are. It's about what love is. It's about where you're going. So that shock is opening up more and more acceptance of what it is to be human, and that it actually doesn't really matter on the outside what's positive and negative. Like those shocks are here to initiate something in us and to awaken us to our innocence. So I feel like this is what we call the channel of the shaman, and it's the only connection from the G to the ego center, the heart center. So there is a coming back from the little I, the small I, the ego I, into the bigger I, the existential I, that bigger kind of soul identity. So that's also how this channel goes.
So, we covered a lot of different energies right there, and I just want to make sure that this is all clear. The 51 is where the sun is currently, and it's this gene key of thunder that moves from agitation in its shadow, the unease of being in a physical form for the soul and spirit, into a state of initiative, of a like a life force that begins moving through you and leads to an awakening. But that shock on the human design, it connects to the 25 in that central space of the G center. And the 25, the city is universal love. So the shadow of constriction. So the path between those is acceptance. And what you're describing there, it sounds like, is that this experience of unease, the agitation that we experience from what really seems to stem from our perception of separation, through that pathway of acceptance, it allows us to move through both of these energies in a very powerful way. And in lunar alchemy, what we're looking at is these solar energies reflected from the body of the moon, which is a manifestation of separation of the earth. The moon is part of the earth's body, but our perception is that it's separated. It's up in the sky. We only see it at night. It goes through these cycles up in the heavens, and we don't experience it as a part of our earth, energetically speaking. And so that very feeling of separation is what is the basis for all agitation. When we experience thunder, oftentimes we think about thunder and lightning are intertwined, because without lightning, there is no thunder, right? But when you have the force of thunder only, that's the sound wave that's produced by the discharge of energy. And when we look at a sort of a primordial creation experience, the stories of creation throughout many, many different traditions point to the waters, the sound of creation that in some ways precedes the light. And this energetic force of thunder is that sound wave of a forceful awareness of our separations. If we had a total experience of being at one with everything, there would be no agitation. There would be no experience of a shock wave from a contrast. There is no contrast when we are in an experience of unification. each thing is experienced as self. So there's no contrast to even perceive. And so that shock of that perception can't occur in that state. But here we are in a body experiencing this separation, and we have a yearning that can be activated in the direction of awakening. And that entire process is based right here where the sun energies exist in this 51st gene key of experiencing the separation and of having that that striving towards a greater experience, whether it's a larger experience of self. You know, you described, Bella, the small self as it exists through the ego center, and the sort of larger universal self. No matter how we're orienting ourselves on this pathway, whether it's to become one with the entire cosmos or even beyond that, or just reaching our greatest potential, this force of thunder is what provides that opening for us to move through it and to move beyond it. Really, really I feel it, maybe it's just because we're in this codon of humanity where there's all of these gene keys that function together, that kind of defines the energies of our experience together. But it really feels like we keep coming to these movements of the sun that are describing the basis of all spiritual experience. So Bella, I'm curious about what your thoughts are around those ideas, that sort of like experience of separation or the shock waves of that experience. Yeah, I'm just curious about your perspective on how this moves for us.
Yeah, so I'm even gonna stop sharing. So the 57 is what codes the core wound according to Richard Rudd. So it is that experience of, it's what codes the gestation period of 9 months. And it's when you speak about separation, like we are basically one with our mother. We come from that body, we grow in that womb, and then, you know, after 9 months we have that experience of coming out in a new world. And of course we know that even as a fetus we can feel the environment. And there's probably this, you know, we say in human design that the 57 is the fear of tomorrow. So we know already that there's going to be a separation, something's going to happen. And that is also when we've spoken about it before, the scrambling with the mother, with the DNA, with the lineage. Like we are in the water of our lineage, and we bathe there for about 9 months, and then we come out. So we have that imprint, and that's what Richard Rudd says. That is the imprint, like you say, of separation. That is the last and newest one of the core wounds when we look at them kind of time-wise. And that is, I guess, too, like we kind of peel the onion from the back. And I feel like that is where we are a lot in the world. And of course, when we are in an Aries gate, which is very, very much about our individualism, and where we look at society today, where, you know, there is a lot of hyper independence and hyper individuality. And me coming from a country like Sweden, where I don't think there is any other country where there are so, first and foremost, so many singles, but even worse in a way, so many old people that are alone and that die alone and that sit alone at Easter. I mean, it was just Easter and they're alone at Easter. And that, you know, that for me is sad. And it is in those cultures that are more technological, they're more advanced. I mean, just the Latin countries or Spain or Italy, there the family is much more important, and there is a kind of responsibility, like the to take the parents took care of you when you were a child, and then there is at least, you know, that heart, you know, it, maybe even if there is like some help, you know, you might not have to do, but there's always like for the family to come together around holidays around, and that is very much lost in the technology, like the technology advanced nations. So that's what it brings up for me, the separation. And on a
Mm-hmm.
more gene key related, I mean, at the end of the day, there's always going to be separation if you don't accept the fact that you came, you chose, your soul chose to come here to be in physical form. And I think that is the hardest thing. I have the 57, like I think I said, it's my core wound, my vocation. It's also my Saturn. So it's like where I get punished if I don't follow the law of my Jupiter. And it's taken me so long. And still today, that acceptance, a total acceptance that my soul, my spirit, that in somehow seem perfect, are in flesh, in a body that is going to fall apart, that is going to die. That has been that separation for me. How can I be eternal and at the same time not eternal? And why do I have to trust a form that I know at the end of the day that it's going to break down? As that for me is that separation of not being integral in what is right now. And the only in some way I feel like the only way of being that is in the now. You know, as soon as we think about, you can only be alive or dead now, and that's the only place, it's only in presence where there is no separation.
Mm. Yeah. Um, this is very interesting in that, you know, this solar transit began yesterday. And of course, on Sunday was the Easter holiday, um, you know, which, whether or not it is celebrated by a person, it is a festival that is, or a holiday, if you want to call it that, that is centered around this idea of the difference between our transient life in a body and our eternal life as a spirit, or perhaps the possibility of our soul taking on an eternal quality, um, and and the possibility of merging that within a living body. Um, and it's interesting with each of these, over the past several weeks, each of these transits have dealt with some aspect of our experience that feels very strongly to me that it's dealing with this experience of birth, life, and death,
Mhm.
the three phases of being a human, a human being. Um, and, you know, I had, my time and space didn't allow for it, but I had wanted to kind of discuss that holiday and its relationship to what we're doing in lunar alchemy as a spiritual possibility, not a religious possibility, but one that, um, religions are, Christianity is certainly centered around it. And many religions are centered around this form of possibility, although that takes um, many different forms. Um, and how our consciousness, our awareness can be cultivated into a state of experiencing our self, our greater expanded self through the body, that is at one with not only our earthly surroundings, but also the cosmic surroundings. Because, um, the human body in some philosophies is essentially a heap of food. Um, that's why we have to eat. And in many forms of food, what brings life into the body is the force of energy provided by the sun. And the water that we eat in the food and that we consume just as water allows for the movement of that life force and the transmission of that life force to move from the food into the living cells of the body to nourish the living microorganisms that are in our body and allowing our physical body to function properly. And um, when we think about that period of gestation where we're a fetus in our mother's womb, we don't really have, other than our connection to our mother, we don't have any access to the outer forces of the sun that are coming through us. And in some ways of looking at that gestation, it happens after 10. Amazing that we have 10 fingers. 10 lunar cycles is the period of gestation for birth. And rather than looking at our modern day calendar, the ancients would measure that pregnancy by the period of lunar cycles, not by a period of months or weeks as we do today. Um, and I believe those traditions and of the some of the ancient pre-Christian traditions that were based upon these energies of resurrection that came through the mystery schools, they had an awareness of these forces of the sun, the forces of the moon, and how they affect our physical and spiritual bodies as a human being. And for now at this time, looking at this energy kind of reflecting from the moon of agitation and initiative and the city of awakening, that awakening possibility to me is descriptive of the entire process of what we are doing in a human body, this earthly form that was primarily influenced in its creation by the energies of the moon while we're in gestation, and of our process of incorporating into us the energetics of the sun to create that awakening. When we think of being awake, that happens in the morning with the rising of the sun. we in a sense, every single night we have a mini death of going to sleep, except that in the case of this mini death, we wake up to the body that we actually fell asleep in. Whereas in the biological death process, many mystics have described, and this Easter holiday foretells of the possibility that through the process of dying, it is a transition into an awakening of a different form of life. There is really, from this perspective, no death. It's just a transformation of the life force that is moving into another stage of its experience. So, I mean, I feel like, Easter just happened. Here we are with this possibility of awakening and the churning of life experiences that causes unease and agitation and all of that. It amazes me how quickly it feels that this understanding of gene keys, of the I Ching hexagrams, of the astrological movements, and looking at the movements of the cosmos, even if it's just the sun, the earth, and the moon, how quickly it penetrates to the very basis of what it is to be a human. And again, maybe that's because we're working in this codon of humanity, but um, it astonishes me every week that we come into this and are working with such um, a subject that is so deeply close to where we come from and where we're going.
Mm.
So Bella, would you like to, is there anything else you'd like to share before we kind of move on with our members and kind of prepare for any um, more discussion before the quantum healing transmission?
I feel just with that 57 that is the earth, it's not actually to weighing us down. If we
Mm.
carry all that thunder energy, whatever, if we carry it on us, it's really, really heavy. And I feel like where we are now and where we're daring to be is to be actually holding that, because it's a little bit like that water that we were swimming in gestation. It's if we can include that instead of carrying it as the fear of tomorrow, or carrying it as something we perceive being the coding of our lineage. If instead we can actually allow it to be in our body, in our cells, I feel that's the only way it can transmute. If you are closing it out from the cell, there cannot be a cellular transmutation, and the DNA can shift into a higher frequency. The only way you can allow it to be that is to be able to include it, to hold it within your being, within your cells. And that is how I feel like even the water, it feels like the thunder and the wind is kind of moving that intracellular water. And in that movement, when we can just actually be that observer, like we were speaking about a few weeks ago, and sit with it, even if it's comfortable, even if there is agitation, even if there is initiation, that is the initiation that leads to mutation, that leads to a higher functioning of our DNA, which is very much like you're saying, John, that codon ring of humanity, and how we are learning or relearning to be human beings at a higher frequency held in our body. It's not about the higher frequency of consciousness up there, out there in spirit. Those two hexagrams are showing at this that it's very much inside, holding it inside our body, and it's a cellular truth. So it's not worth anything for humanity if it's not held as a cellular truth. And that's what I want to highlight, and that's what I want to invite us to dare to do. It's not easy, but it's worth it. And that is the core wound, coding the core wound of humanity, according to Richard Rudd. So it's also very much part of the gene key teaching. So that would be my my words about it.
No, thank you. I love that you are always able to bring it into that direct level of awareness from this perspective of the mutation of our DNA, the gene expression. Um, some people may think of that as an evolution. Sometimes people think of mutation as carrying this quality of disfigurement or moving, away from its intended purpose. But in this context, it is, of course, a mutation that allows for greater possibility, a higher frequency experience. And what I love about that, bringing that in, is it perfectly describes the function of quantum healing transmissions, and how thunder is actually the source of the energetic frequency that is delivered into our energetic bodies. The sound waves of creation can be translated into forms of frequency that affect the manifestation of our reality, not just over time. That's kind of a way that we experience changes from our perspective. But from a standpoint of being outside of time, outside of space, which is truly that city of awakening, sound waves can, and when I'm speaking of sound waves, I'm referring to the divine primal sound fields that are the source of all creation. They're the primary vibration that is even the vibration that occurs even prior to the manifestation of light. Um, these fields inhabit all of the space that our quantum universe is composed of. You know, if we look at our even our human bodies at the quantum level, we're 99.999 something percent space. And within that space is these sound waves. And that's where the quantum healing transmissions interact with us within our bodies to allow for the manifestation of the possibilities to hold the higher frequencies, exactly what you're suggesting, Bella. So,
So if anybody who's watching wants to join, you know, we are going to post the link to Lunar Alchemy. What we do after the lives every Tuesday is that John is taking us into a transmission. And then we also sometimes we have a little bit extra things to share. And also we come back and there's the possibility to interact and ask questions. And that is even more cool. Like the conversation is beautiful, but to actually have the felt experience of how these things are working inside of us, that's really the true value. So I just wanted to know that that's a possibility, and we are excited to have more people having that experience with us.
Awesome, thank you. So